The sun hung merciless over Redemption Valley, a cruel copper disk that had baked the earth for 3 months without reprieve. Thomas Whitmore wiped the sweat from his weathered brow as he surveyed his dying cattle, their ribs showing through patchy hide like the bars of a prison. The creek that once bubbled through his property had become nothing more than cracked mud and the skeletal remains of cottonwoods. "Tom," the voice cut through the oppressive heat like a blade. Sheriff Marcus Kane rode up on his dusty mare, his badge catching the harsh light. Behind him, a mob of 20 men from town approached on horseback, their faces twisted with the particular ugliness that comes from fear dressed as righteousness. Thomas straightened, his calloused hands instinctively moving to the rifle leaning against his fence post. "Marcus, what brings you out here in this heat? You know damn well what brings us here." Kane's voice carried the weight of someone who'd been arguing with angry men for hours. "We found her, Tom. The witch. The one who's been cursing our town." The mob parted slightly, revealing a young Apache girl, perhaps 16, her hands bound with thick rope. Her dark eyes held a fierce dignity despite the purple bruise blooming across her left cheek. She wore a simple doe-skin dress, now torn and dirty from whatever struggle had led to her capture. "That's a child, Marcus." Thomas kept his voice steady, though something cold was settling in his stomach. "What's she accused of?" "Witchcraft," shouted Henry Caldwell, the town's blacksmith, his massive frame trembling with rage. "She was found near the dried-up spring, chanting in that heathen tongue. Old Miguel saw her dancing around bones and feathers at moonlight." The girl's head snapped up, her eyes blazing. "I was praying," she said in clear English, her voice carrying the musical accent of her people. "Praying for rain to return to the land that feeds us all." "Lies!" spat another man. "Ever since she and her kind started camping near the valley, the drought's gotten worse. My crops are dead, my animals dying." Thomas studied the girl's face, seeing not the wild savage of frontier nightmares, but a young woman trying to maintain her dignity in the face of mob hysteria. Her hands, he noticed, were stained with plant matter, likely from gathering herbs, not casting spells. "What do you want from me?" Thomas asked, though he suspected he already knew. Sheriff Kane dismounted, his boots hitting the ground with finality. "The town council met in emergency session. They want her burned at dawn, Tom, and they want you to do it." The words hung in the air like a physical weight. Thomas felt his throat constrict. "Me? You're the only one with a clear shot at justice," Kane continued, his voice growing more uncomfortable with each word. "Your Sarah died of the fever last spring. The town figures you understand loss better than most and, well, you're respected. People trust you to do what's right." Thomas's jaw tightened at the mention of his wife. Sarah had been taken by typhoid, not witchcraft, but he understood the twisted logic. In their grief and desperation, the townspeople needed someone to blame, and they needed someone they respected to carry out their vengeance. "She's just a girl," Thomas said quietly. "She's a witch," Caldwell roared. "And witches burn. It's the only way to break the curse and bring the rains back." The girl, Thomas realized he didn't even know her name, stood straighter, her chin raised defiantly. "I am Ayana of the Chiricahua Apache. I am daughter of Chief Neche. I have brought no curse upon your land. The drought comes from the sky, not from the heart of one girl." "See how she speaks?" another man shouted. "Too educated for a savage. She's been touched by dark spirits." Thomas stepped forward and the mob instinctively moved back. He was not a large man, but years of hard frontier life had carved him into something solid and immovable. "I won't be party to murder based on superstition." "It's not murder," Kane said desperately. "It's justice. The whole town's agreed. Tom, if you don't do this, someone else will, and it won't be as merciful." Thomas looked at the girl again, Ayana, and saw something that made his decision for him. In her eyes, despite the terror that had to be clawing at her insides, burned the same fierce love of life he'd seen in Sarah's eyes during her final days. The same refusal to surrender dignity in the face of death. "I'll think about it," he said finally. "Think fast," Kane warned. "Dawn comes in 12 hours. The whole town will be watching." As the mob mounted their horses and disappeared into the heat shimmer, Thomas remained standing beside his fence, staring at the distant mountains where storm clouds had been gathering fruitlessly for weeks. The weight of choice pressed down on him like the oppressive sky itself. He thought of Sarah, of her gentle hands tending to wounded animals, of her voice reading scripture by lamplight. "What am I supposed to do, darling?" he whispered to the empty air. The wind offered no answer, only the dry whisper of dying grass and the distant sound of crows calling to each other across the wasteland his life had become. The jail cell in Redemption Valley was little more than a wooden cage, its bars rough-hewn and secured with a padlock that had seen better days. Ayanna sat on the single wooden bench, her back straight despite the circumstances, her dark eyes fixed on the small window that offered a view of the dusty main street. Thomas approached the jail as the sun began its descent toward the mountains, casting long shadows across the rutted dirt road. Sheriff Kane sat on the porch, whittling a piece of wood with mechanical precision, his movements betraying the nervous energy that had consumed him since the mob's decision. "Come to look at your work?" Kane asked without looking up. "Come to talk to her," Thomas replied, settling into the wooden chair beside the sheriff. "A man should know who he's expected to kill." Kane's knife paused mid-stroke. "Tom, you don't have to make this harder than it needs to be. The town's made its choice. Sometimes leadership means doing what's necessary, not what's comfortable." Leadership. Thomas tasted the word like it was sour. "That what we're calling it?" Through the window, they could see townspeople gathering in small groups, their voices carrying the excited buzz of people who believed salvation was at hand. Martha Henley, the minister's wife, stood outside the general store gesturing animatedly to a circle of women. Even from a distance, Thomas could see the righteous fury in their postures. "She's been asking for you," Kane said quietly. "The girl asked if she could speak to the man who would handle things." Thomas stood, his chair scraping against the wooden porch. "Open the door, Marcus." The sheriff's keys jangled as he unlocked the cell. Ayanna rose gracefully, her movements carrying the fluid strength of someone raised in the wilderness. Up close, Thomas could see she was older than he'd first thought, maybe 18 or 19, but her youth made the situation no less obscene. "You are Thomas Whitmore," she said. It wasn't a question. "I am. I know of you. Your wife, Sarah. She helped our people last winter when the soldiers burned our food stores. She brought blankets and medicine, asked nothing in return." Thomas felt something tighten in his chest. Sarah had never mentioned helping the Apache, but that was like her. Kindness without fanfare, charity without expectation of praise. "She was a good woman," he said simply. "Yes, she had a good heart." Ayanna moved to the window, gazing out at the town that had condemned her. "I think maybe you do too. But tomorrow, you will burn me alive because frightened people need someone to blame for their suffering. The town thinks you brought the drought. The town thinks many things that are not true." Ayanna turned back to face him, and Thomas was struck by her composure. "Do you think I am a witch, Thomas Whitmore?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Thomas studied her face, looking for signs of the evil the townspeople claimed to see. Instead, he saw intelligence, sadness, and a deep weariness that seemed too old for her years. "I think you're a girl who was in the wrong place when scared people needed someone to blame," he said finally. "Then why will you kill me?" The directness of the question hit Thomas like a physical blow. He had no answer that wouldn't damn him in his own eyes, so he remained silent. "My father is Nietzsche," Ayanna continued, her voice taking on a different quality. "He leads 300 warriors. They know I am missing. They know which direction I was taken." Thomas felt his blood chill. "You're threatening the town?" "I threaten no one. I speak truth." Her eyes held his steadily. "If I do not return, they will come. Not for revenge, for justice. There is a difference. Justice for one girl against a whole town. Justice for the murder of an innocent." Ayanna's voice grew softer, more dangerous. "My people have watched your people take our land, kill our children, break treaty after treaty. But we have also seen good among you. Men like the trader Mackenzie who deals honestly. Women like your Sarah who see suffering and act to heal it. The question is, which kind of man are you, Thomas Whitmore?" Before Thomas could respond, the jail door burst open. Henry Caldwell filled the doorway, his face flushed with drink and excitement. "What's this? Making friends with the witch, Tom?" "I'm doing what I said I'd do," Thomas replied evenly. "Thinking. Well, think faster. The whole town's gathering wood for the pyre. Even got the minister to come out and give his blessing." Caldwell's eyes glittered with anticipation. "Dawn's coming, and with it, the end of our troubles." After Caldwell left, Thomas stood in the gathering darkness, feeling the weight of choice pressing down on him. Through the window he could see the growing pile of wood in the town square, the eager faces of his neighbors, as they prepared for what they believed would be their salvation. "There's something else you should know," Ayanna said quietly. "The drought will not end with my death. Rain comes in its own time, by its own laws, but the blood of an innocent woman will stain this town forever." Thomas looked at her one last time, seeing not the monster of frontier nightmares but a young woman facing death with more dignity than those who would kill her. In that moment he made his choice. "I won't do it," he said. "Then someone else will. Maybe, but not me." As Thomas walked home through the darkening streets, the weight of his decision settled around him like a shroud. He thought of Sarah, of her gentle hands and fierce heart, and knew she would have made the same choice. The question now was whether he had the courage to follow through. In the distance, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, but the air remained thick and still, pregnant with the possibility of rain that might never come. The grandfather clock in Thomas's front room chimed midnight, its deep tones echoing through the empty house like a funeral bell. He sat at his kitchen table, a half-empty bottle of whiskey before him, staring at the flickering flame of a single candle. The weight of his decision pressed against his chest like a physical thing, making each breath an effort. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the windows and sending dust devils dancing through the empty streets. The storm clouds that had been gathering all day now filled the sky, blocking out the stars and casting the world into an oppressive darkness. Thomas stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. If he was going to act, it had to be now, while the town slept and the guards grew careless. He pulled on his boots and hat, then moved to the gun cabinet in the corner of the room. His fingers hesitated over the rifles before settling on a small revolver, enough to defend himself if necessary, but not so much as to invite a gunfight he couldn't win. The jail stood at the end of Main Street, a squat building that looked more like a storage shed than a place to hold prisoners. A single lamp burned in the window, casting long shadows across the wooden porch where Deputy Jake Morrison sat dozing in his chair, his rifle across his lap. Thomas approached carefully, his boots silent on the packed dirt. Morrison was young, barely out of his teens, and had the soft look of someone who'd never faced real hardship. The deputy's breathing was deep and regular, his head tilted back against the wall. "Jake," Thomas whispered. The young man jerked awake, his hand moving instinctively to his rifle. "Mr. Whitmore? What are you doing here?" "Came to see the girl one more time before dawn," Thomas said quietly. "Make sure I know what I'm doing." Morrison relaxed slightly, his grip on the rifle loosening. "Sheriff Kane said you might come by. Said to let you have as much time as you need." The deputy fumbled for his keys, the metal jangling loudly in the still air. "You sure about this, Mr. Whitmore? I mean, burning someone alive seems like there ought to be another way." "Sometimes there's no good choices, Jake. Just choices we can live with." The cell door swung open with a rusty creak. Ayanna sat on the wooden bench, her back straight despite the long hours of confinement. She looked up as Thomas entered, her dark eyes reflecting the lamplight. "You have come to tell me you will not do it," she said. It wasn't a question. "How did you know?" "Because you are here alone, in darkness, with guilt written on your face like words in a book." She stood gracefully, her movements fluid despite the cramped quarters. "What will you do instead?" Thomas glanced toward the door where Deputy Morrison had returned to his chair. "There's a root cellar under my barn, stone walls, hidden entrance. You could hide there until what? Until my father comes with his warriors? Until this town burns because of me? Until I figure out a way to get you out of here without bloodshed." Ayanna studied his face in the flickering light. "You would risk your life for a stranger? For an Apache girl your people believe is a witch? I'd risk my life to avoid becoming a murderer." For the first time since he'd met her, Ayanna smiled. It transformed her face, revealing the young woman beneath the stoic mask she'd worn. "Your wife chose well, Thomas Whitmore." Moving quickly but quietly, Thomas led Ayanna through the cell door. Morrison had dozed off again, his breathing deep and regular. They crept past the sleeping deputy and out into the wind-swept night. The journey to Thomas's ranch took nearly an hour, moving carefully through the darkness to avoid the few late-night wanderers who might still be abroad. The wind continued to build, carrying with it the scent of rain and the promise of storms. The root cellar was exactly as Thomas had described, a stone-walled chamber beneath the barn, accessed through a hidden trapdoor concealed by hay bales. The space was small but sturdy, with shelves lined with preserved vegetables and cured meat. A small air vent provided ventilation, and thick walls would muffle any sound. "It's not much," Thomas said, lighting a small oil lamp. But it's safe. Ayanna examined the space with the practical eye of someone accustomed to hardship. It will do. How long do you think before they discover I'm gone? Dawn. Maybe sooner if Morrison wakes up and decides to check on you. Then you have perhaps 4 hours before they come looking. Thomas nodded grimly. I'll bring you water and food before then. After that, he shrugged helplessly. After that, you become a fugitive in your own town. The truth of it hung between them like a sword. Thomas had crossed a line from which there was no return. By morning he would be branded a traitor to his own people, a man who had chosen the enemy over his neighbors. Why? Ayanna asked quietly. Why risk everything for me? Thomas was quiet for a long moment, listening to the wind whistling through the barn above. Because Sarah wouldn't have been able to live with herself if she'd let an innocent girl die. And neither can I. As he prepared to leave, Ayanna caught his arm. Thomas, when they come, and they will come, remember that you are not alone. My people have a saying. A man who stands for justice stands with the spirits of all who came before. Your wife's spirit stands with you. Thomas nodded, not trusting his voice. He climbed the ladder back to the barn floor, carefully replaced the hay bales over the trapdoor, and made his way back to his house. In the distance, the first faint gray of dawn was beginning to touch the eastern mountains. Soon the town would wake to find their sacrifice gone, and the hunt would begin in earnest. Thomas sat in his kitchen, the whiskey bottle forgotten, and waited for the storm to break. The pounding on Thomas's door came just as the sun crested the mountains, its light painting the drought-stricken valley in shades of gold and amber. He had been awake for hours, sitting at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee grown cold in his hands, watching the shadows retreat across his barren fields. Thomas Whitmore. Sheriff Kane's voice carried the weight of barely controlled fury. Open this door. Thomas rose slowly, his movements deliberate and calm. Through the window he could see the mob that had gathered in his yard. Easily 50 men armed with rifles and the kind of righteous anger that made men dangerous. Sheriff Kane stood at their head, his face grim with the knowledge of what had transpired. The door opened to reveal Kane's weathered face, lined with exhaustion and something that might have been disappointment. She's gone, Tom. Cell was empty when Morrison checked at dawn. Is that so? Thomas stepped onto his porch, his hand resting casually on the doorframe. That's unfortunate. Don't play games with me. Kane's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. Morrison remembers you visiting last night. Says you talked to her for near an hour. The crowd pressed closer, their voices rising in an angry buzz. Thomas recognized most of the faces. Men he'd known for years, shared drinks with, helped during hard times. Now they looked at him with suspicion and growing hatred. Where is she, Tom? Henry Caldwell pushed forward, his massive frame quivering with rage. What did you do with the witch? I don't know what you're talking about, Thomas replied evenly. I visited the jail, spoke with the prisoner about what the town expected of me. Then I came home. Liar! The shout came from somewhere in the crowd. You helped her escape. Search the property, Kane said quietly. Every building, every room. If she's here, we'll find her. Thomas watched with outward calm as the mob spread across his ranch like a swarm of angry insects. They tore through his house, overturning furniture and scattering his possessions. They searched the barn, the tool shed, the chicken coop. Several men even climbed onto the roof as if expecting to find the Apache girl hiding in the rafters. But the root cellar remained undiscovered, hidden beneath its camouflage of hay bales and shadows. Nothing, Kane reported after an hour of searching. Either she's not here or you've hidden her somewhere we can't find. Maybe she really is a witch, Thomas suggested mildly. Maybe she just vanished into smoke. The joke fell flat, earning him several murderous glares. The crowd's mood was growing uglier by the moment, their frustration building toward violence. I know what you did, Caldwell snarled, stepping close enough that Thomas could smell the whiskey on his breath. You're a traitor to your own kind. Should string you up alongside the witch when we find her. Easy, Henry, Kane warned, but his voice lacked conviction. A new voice cut through the tension like a blade. You won't have to look much longer. Everyone turned to see young Billy Santos running up the path, his face flushed with excitement and fear. Sheriff, there's riders coming. Lots of them. Kane grabbed the boy's shoulders. What kind of riders? Apache, Billy gasped. Must be 300 of them, maybe more. They're coming down from the North Pass, moving fast. The blood drained from Kane's face. 300? I counted the dust clouds. Billy nodded frantically. They'll be here within the hour. The mob exploded into panicked chatter. Some men began backing toward their horses, their earlier bravado evaporating in the face of genuine danger. Others fingered their weapons nervously, as if 50 rifles could stand against 300 Apache warriors. This is your fault. Caldwell whirled on Thomas, his eyes wild. You warned them. You sent word to her people. I haven't left my property since last night, Thomas replied calmly. You all saw me here. Then how did they know? Kane demanded. Thomas shrugged. Maybe they just came looking for a missing girl. Maybe they figured out what happened to her. The ground began to tremble with the approach of horses. In the distance, a cloud of dust rose against the morning sky, and beneath it, the first glimpse of riders, Apache warriors in full war paint, their faces grim with purpose. We need to get back to town, Kane said urgently. Fortify the buildings, prepare for siege. No, the voice came from behind them, quiet, but carrying absolute authority. Everyone turned to see Ayanna emerging from the barn, her doeskin dress clean and her black hair freshly braided. She moved with the fluid grace of a young woman who had never known fear, her dark eyes scanning the crowd with calm assessment. You, Caldwell breathed. Where were you hiding? That doesn't matter now, Ayanna replied. What matters is that you listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you. She walked to the center of the yard, placing herself between Thomas and the mob. My father comes not for war but for justice. He comes for his daughter and for the man who saved her life. Saved her life? Kane's voice was barely a whisper. Thomas Whitmore chose honor over fear. He chose to protect an innocent rather than murder her to satisfy your superstitions. Ayanna's voice carried across the yard like a clear bell. In doing so, he prevented a war that would have cost many lives on both sides. The thundering of hooves grew closer. The Apache riders crested the hill overlooking Thomas's ranch, their numbers seeming to fill the entire horizon. They rode with the disciplined precision of a military unit, their weapons ready but not yet raised. At their head rode a man Thomas recognized from wanted posters, Chief Neitch himself, his weathered face painted for war, his eyes scanning the crowd until they found his daughter. The Apache war party came to a halt 50 yards from the ranch house, their horses snorting and stamping in the morning air. The silence stretched like a bowstring, broken only by the whistle of wind through the valley. Neitch dismounted slowly, his movements graceful despite his age. He walked forward until he stood before his daughter, his eyes searching her face for signs of harm. My daughter, he said in English, his voice carrying the weight of mountains. You are unharmed? I am unharmed, father. Thanks to this man. Ayanna gestured toward Thomas, who stood straighter despite the fear he felt. Neitch's eyes shifted to Thomas, studying him with the intensity of a man accustomed to judging character quickly and accurately. You are the one who was ordered to kill my daughter? I was asked to do it, Thomas replied steadily. I chose not to. Why? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Thomas was aware that his answer might determine not just his own fate, but the fate of everyone in Redemption Valley. Because it was wrong, he said simply. Because she was innocent. Because sometimes a man has to choose between what's easy and what's right. Neitch nodded slowly. You risked your life for a stranger. For an Apache girl your people called enemy. I risked my life to remain the kind of man my wife would be proud of. For a long moment the two men stared at each other across the gulf of culture and history that separated them. Then Neitch smiled, an expression that transformed his weathered face. Thomas Whitmore, he said formally, you have shown honor. You have chosen justice over fear, mercy over hatred. For this, you have the friendship of the Chiricahua Apache. The chief turned to address the crowd, his voice carrying clearly across the yard. The drought that plagues your valley comes not from my daughter's presence, but from the sky itself. It will end when the rains choose to return, not when innocent blood is shed. As if summoned by his words, the storm clouds that had been gathering all morning suddenly opened, releasing the first drops of rain that had fallen in Redemption Valley in 3 months. The drops became a steady patter, then a downpour, soaking the dry earth and filling the air with the sweet scent of moisture. The townspeople stood in stunned silence, their faces upturned to the sky, feeling the rain they had prayed for washing away the dust and fear of the past months. The rains have returned, Neitch said quietly, not because a witch has died, But because the earth has patience that men often lack, he mounted his horse with fluid grace, then looked down at Thomas one last time. You will always be welcome in our camp, Thomas Whitmore. You are a man of honor in a world that often forgets what honor means. As the Apache riders departed, disappearing into the rain-washed mountains as suddenly as they had appeared, Thomas stood in his yard, feeling the cool water running down his face. The mob had dispersed, the men slinking away in shame and confusion, their certainty shattered by the reality of rain and the dignity of the people they had sought to destroy. Sheriff Kane was the last to leave, pausing at the edge of the yard to look back at Thomas. You know this changes things between us, Tom, between you and the town. I know, Thomas replied quietly, but I can live with that. As Kane rode away, Thomas turned to find Ayanna still standing in the yard, her face tilted up to catch the rain. She looked at him with something that might have been gratitude or respect, or simply the recognition of one decent person by another. Thank you, she said simply. Thank you for giving me the chance to choose correctly. She smiled, then walked toward the hills where her people waited, disappearing into the rain like a spirit returning to the earth that had made her. Thomas stood alone in his yard, watching the rain fill the dried creek beds and bring life back to his drought-stricken land. In the distance, thunder rolled across the mountains, and for the first time in months the sound carried the promise of hope rather than empty threat. The price of his choice would be high: isolation from his community, suspicion from his neighbors, the loneliness of a man who had chosen principle over belonging. But as he stood in the life-giving rain, feeling it wash away the dust of fear and hatred, Thomas Whitmore knew he had made the only choice he could live with. In the end, that was enough.